So what we need is population control and a whole bunch of other stuff. And the environment has to be fixed. University of London economics professor Dr. Peter Bauer, a leading authority on third world development, has written contemporary famines and food shortages occur mostly in sparsely populated subsistence economies with abundant land. He points out that the small size of farms and the low level of agricultural productivity over most of the less developed world reflect lack of skills, ambition, and energy, or social beliefs and customs adverse to economic achievement, and not a shortage of land. When Colin Clark, former director of the Agricultural Economic Institute at Oxford University, analyzed the food-raising capabilities of the various types of land throughout the world, he concluded that if all farmers were to employ the most productive methods, sufficient food could be raised to provide an American-style diet for 35.1 billion people, more than 6 times the present world population at that time. Clark further estimated that at Japanese standards of consumption, more than 100 billion persons could be adequately fed, and the Japanese are arguably more healthy than we are. Former Harvard Center for Population Studies director Roger Revelle estimated in 1979 that the agricultural resources of the world were capable of providing an adequate diet, 2,500 kilocalories per day, as well as fiber, rubber, beverages for 40 billion people, and that it would require the use of less than 1/4 of the Earth's ice-free land area. His figures were based on the assumption that average yields would only be 1/2 of those realized in the United States Midwest. Writing in the Wall Street Journal for September 19, 1991, Hudson Institute fellow Dennis Avery, principal author of the Institute's book Global Food Progress 1991, agrees that the world isn't running out of food or farming resources. Avery insists that per capita food supplies in the third world have increased 25% above subsistence since 1960, during the peak of the current population growth surge. The U.S. Agency for International Development's newly completed demographic survey shows third world birth rates slowing more rapidly than anyone had predicted, and third world food production continues to rise twice as fast as its population. Overall, Avery concludes that the reality of the world's food and environmental gains are confirmed by all the major published data series, including the UN's Food and Agricultural Organization and the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Every reputable study of the world's carrying capacity has concluded that the world can feed its expected population growth. So E. Calvin Beisner, author of Prospects of Growth, a biblical view of population, resources, and the future, confirms that the combination of increased productivity and continuity innovation have led to multiplying returns from resources, so that natural resources have actually become more abundant as population has increased. And Cato Institute senior fellow Doug Bandow adds that there has been a steady increase in the estimated reserves of everything from copper to oil to zinc between 1985 and 1990 alone. Proven international petroleum reserves jumped by 400 billion barrels. And William A. Gesch wrote, back to Genesis periodical brochure, the chief problem with man, according to the new agenda, is separation from his environment, and that man simply cannot be spiritually fulfilled unless this breach is restored. Now, the Bible, however, as well as history, teaches exactly the opposite. The great crisis is not that man is separated from creation, but that he is separated from his creator. Until this is rectified, man will only become increasingly alienated from his fellow man, and nature will become increasingly alienated from his fellow man, and nature will become increasingly distorted. The whole of creation groans and travails today, not because man has turned his back on nature, but because he has turned his back on God. The teaching that says man has a special dignity, or is in some way above the animals, is viewed today by environmentalists and New Age educators as utterly repugnant and is one of chief causes for the decay in our environment. Evolution teaches that man is a mere animal, made in the image of ape at best. For this reason, many school children are taught that the Native American religions are far more noble than Christianity. For in those beliefs, man is viewed holistically as a part of the natural world from which he evolved. If evolution is true, then nature is not so much to be cared for as it is to be revered as sacred, which is what our vice president espouses at that time. The biblical teachings that man is separate, being made in God's image, and that man has been commissioned to have dominion over nature, are held up for ridicule today. Does this sound like today, even now in 2023? According to this new agenda, only if the environment is set right can there be any hope that man can live harmoniously with his fellow man and with nature. Yet the book of James declares that it is because of an internal problem, sin, that man has lusted, destroyed, and warred with his fellow man. One hardly ever will ever learn today that the real reason from the French Revolution and more recently from the fall of communist Soviet Union, this lesson is that man cannot be perfected by furnishing the proper teaching environment, for man's fundamental flaw is an internal one. Getting right with God is crucial to a healthy view of this environment, and both the Bible and history teach us this. So, these hyper-environmentalists claim that because such problems as global warming and ozone depletion pose a clear and imminent threat, it will only be by the most concerted global effort, including the foregoing of a new spirituality, that disaster is to be averted. Most people are not aware that there is no consensus yet existing in the scientific community that global warming even has been determined to be real, much less to be dangerous, even today. The Christian has been commanded by God to show a serious and sober concern for the environment. Although we should not shrink from accepting our part of the blame for the current state of the environment, we must not be taken in by this emerging new environmental religion. Man is indeed in grave danger today because of his separation not from nature but from the God who created nature. Robert W. Lee again states, Dr. Peter Raven, professor of botany, Washington University, St. Louis, has lamented that with about 5% of the world's population, the U.S. produces 25% of the world's output of carbon dioxide, which is supposed to be warming the globe to a dangerous degree. While there is little scientific basis for or actual evidence of global warming hypotheses, reductions in CO2 could prove disastrous to food production and water supplies worldwide. An increasing number of scientists are convinced that, if anything, our planet is seriously deficient in CO2, and that a doubling or more would be highly beneficial. Where do plants take in? Carbon dioxide. After all, CO2 is the major building block of life. Plants extract it from the atmosphere through photosynthesis and transform it into food. A doubling of CO2 levels would not only greatly increase food supplies, but help conserve water as well, since plants exposed to higher levels of CO2 do not open their stomates, pores in the leaves, as widely as when there is less CO2 in the air. The smaller the openings, the less water is lost into the atmosphere through evaporation. You got that? Dr. Sherwood B. Idso, Agriculture Department's U.S. Water Conservation Laboratory, has persuasively argued that a doubling of the CO2 content of the atmosphere will produce a tremendous greening of planet Earth. He explains that as CO2 content arises, plants will obviously be able to grow and survive in areas where they currently cannot because of a lack of water. That means that you should see a tremendous redistribution of plants on the face of the earth. In addition, forests should greatly expand their ranges. In its most recent State of the World report released in January of this year, Worldwatch Institute lamented that fresh water shortages are occurring in the U.S. and elsewhere, while worldwide stocks of rice are at 20-year lows. Assuming for the sake of argument that such is actually the case, an increase in CO2 could be the solution, rather than the global warming nightmare envisioned by environmentalists. All right, Dr. Jeffrey T. Baker of the University of Florida's Agronomy Department reports that with rice, elevated CO2 levels will stimulate growth and ultimately this translates into increased grain yield. We're getting typically anywhere from 30 to 40% increases in grain yield. We get increased carbon uptake through photosynthesis, and we get a decline in carbon, less during nighttime respiration. We also get a decline in total water usage, and all this translates into an increase in grain yield, which is the useful portion of the plant with rice. William F. Jasper comments in his review of environmental overkill, whatever happened to common sense? Authors Dixie Lee Ray and Lou Guzzo in the New American Magazine, 1993, in the article entitled Environmental Ammo. Anthropogenic man-made CO2 is estimated to total some 7 billion tons annually worldwide. Sound like an enormous sum? Well, nature, through volcanoes, geysers, and the respiration of countless organisms, contributes an estimated 200 billion tons annually. Man-made CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons, contribute roughly 750 tons of chloride to the atmosphere per year. Mother Earth contributes 600 million tons of chloride through seawater evaporation alone. Volcanoes provide many billions more. Note that any of these effluents, natural or man-made, matter said that much one way or the other. When it comes to the greenhouse effect, a phenomenon essential to life on our planet as we know it, CO2 plays a relatively insignificant role. Indeed, notes Ray, although carbon dioxide is getting all the attention in greenhouse discussions, it is really water, the water vapor of the atmosphere and droplets in the clouds, that is the main greenhouse gas. Water is responsible for 98% of all greenhouse warming, and the evidence from voluminous temperature measurements taken from weather monitoring stations throughout the world over the past 100 years, as well as the continuous temperature readings taken by TIROS second satellite, shows no current global temperature trends either up or down. But that is only part of the picture. The good professor surveys the frightening scenarios and frantic statements of the global warmies from a number of different angles, applying common sense and the facts of science so deftly that their perfervid bleatings are completely exposed by the utterly absurd and fraudulent ravings that they have always been. In similar fashion, she methodically examines the emotionally and politically charged doomsday predictions of the self-appointed guardians of the ozone layer. A major problem with their theory, she points out, is that ultraviolet radiation levels at the Earth's surface are going down, not up. Just the opposite of what the eco-fanatics tell us is happening as a result of man's pumping of CFCs into the atmosphere. Moreover, how do these CFCs rise into the stratosphere when the CFC molecules are 4 to 8 times heavier than air? Answer: there is no evidence that they do reach the stratosphere. At least 192 chemical reactions and another 48 photochemical reactions have been identified in the stratosphere, observes Ray, but none involves CFC, fluorocarbons. Nevertheless, because the U.S. Senate ratified the UN's Montreal Protocol on ozone depletion, Americans will be paying hundreds of billions of dollars and suffering untold refrigeration and air conditioning headaches as the CFC ban, including freon and halons, goes into effect. This is a crime. As Ray points out, not only are CFCs safe, but all of the proposed substitutes have turned out to be very expensive, and some are toxic, flammable, and corrosive. All are inefficient compared to freon. The cost of this one mad act, she notes, may be as high as $5 trillion worldwide by the year 2005. The cost in human lives is even more grim. Because of the severe effect on transportation and storage of food due to the loss of or greatly increased cost of refrigeration, Avers, Dr. Ray estimates indicate that being 20 to 40 million people will die yearly from hunger, starvation, and foodborne diseases. Dixie Lee Ray recognizes that there are global stakes involved in the battle against the environmental extremists. More and more it is becoming clear that those who support the so-called New World Order of world government under the United Nations have adopted global environmentalism as a basis for the dissolution of independent nations and the international realignment of power, she warns. Gary Benoit states, the New American, the ozone layer is not battered, CFCs have not been destroying the ozone layer and the Antarctic ozone hole. which is not an actual hole but a seasonal thinning.